So you want to breed ball pythons, but you don't know how long it's going to take before you have eggs. You should watch this video.
Copy my steel. Face the fact that ain't no cap, I'm real. Ain't no cap, I'm real. The plastic bars when I copy my steel.
Now, the thing about breeding ball pythons is that usually it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months before you get eggs, just off the bat. Now, usually people will start breeding them around the fall, so September to November, and then the females will lay eggs around March, February, sometimes even as late as July. Here is where the problem lies. All of this is all dependent on the snakes. It's not depending on when you put them together. I have snakes that don't want to do anything until January. I've had a few snakes this year that they were just not ready until January. And I've had a few males that are just not ready. Even though the females are ready, the males aren't ready. So all of this is strictly dependent on the animal. It's not dependent on when you put them together. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the timeline. The timeline of breeding is extremely long. So you usually want to make sure the snakes are up to size. So with a male, you can usually start breeding males as low as 500, 600 grams. But what I've noticed is that smaller males have troubles locking with bigger females. This is not entirely the case for every male, but I have noticed it with some males. For example, right now I have a male that's 500 grams and he's locking with the female that's about 2,800 grams and she's ovulating right now. So obviously he did his thing, but the key to that was I only paired him to one female this year because he was small and the other females aren't big enough anyways. So essentially he put all his work in with one female and he didn't have to waste all of his sperm with any other female. So essentially, because this was his first year, that's probably the best route for him. And obviously it panned out because the female's ovulating. The females have to be anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 grams to start. Obviously, the bigger the better. The bigger the female is, the more fat storage there is. And that also leads to possibly more follicles, which means more eggs. So essentially, you want to have bigger females, but that doesn't mean you're going to get more eggs just because they're bigger. I've had females that are 2,000 grams, lay 4 eggs. And I've had females that are, 1,300 grams, lay 7 eggs. So it just happens however they feel like it needs to happen. But you want to give yourself the most chances by making sure your female is above the threshold to breed. Again, the timeline usually starts in the fall. So September to November is usually when you start pairing your snakes. You don't necessarily have to drop the temperatures any. I didn't drop the temperatures at all last year, and they've been locking just fine. The first year I did this, I started dropping temperatures about 2 degrees is about where I dropped them. So they were about 92, 93 on their basking spot, and then I dropped it down to about 90. But this year I didn't do that, and they've been doing just fine. They can self-regulate because they can get further into the tub, as well as getting on the cooler side of the tub. So they can figure out if they want heat or if they want to be cool. And essentially that's what they do. So when you start pairing your snakes, you don't want to pair them every single week. You only want to pair your snakes once a month. If you pair your snakes every single week, you're not going to be doing anything more than if you were pairing them once a month. All of that sperm is going to get wasted. The female doesn't want to absorb more sperm than she needs just so you can get more eggs. That's not how that works. It's all based on how many follicles she has. And that's essentially everything that's going to get inseminated. You're not going to add more eggs just because you keep pairing the male more often. So doing it once a month is strictly all you have to do. You don't have to do more than that. Typically around 4 to 5 locks, which is 4 to 5 months, you're going to start to see the female getting much wider, as well as you'll start seeing her glow a little bit differently. So usually around this time frame, you'll start noticing that she's going to be eating a whole lot more. Sometimes earlier than this. Sometimes it'll be 2 months, 3 months is when they start pounding rats and wanting to eat more, and you'll start seeing them be more food aggressive. Usually this means you have to feed them a little bit more. I feed my snakes every 2 weeks. During the breeding season, when I want them to obviously lay eggs, I start feeding them every 1 week because again, they're developing eggs. So that means they need extra fat and extra food to develop the eggs even further. If you don't do this, it could lead to bad clutches. It could lead to unhealthy females. And it could also lead to reabsorption in the follicles. Reabsorption is when they are developing the follicles, the egg follicles, and they just absorb them right back, and that's it. No more eggs, which happens. Sometimes you can't do anything about it. Sometimes it's just up to the snake. Last year, I had 3 females reabsorb. This year, it looks like I've already had 1 female reabsorb, so we'll see what happens. Sometimes it just takes them a little bit longer, but this one honestly does look like she's reabsorbed. So we shall see what happens with that. So typically when the female stops letting the male lock, that means she's done. She's either going to reabsorb and there's nothing you can do about it, or she's done building the follicles and she's ready to ovulate. Essentially, at this point, you don't want to pair the male anymore. Once she stops letting the male do his thing, just stop pairing the male. At this point, you're going to start looking signs for ovulation. The signs for ovulation are pretty significant. You will not be able to miss it. It becomes a huge bulge at the bottom of the snake. On the lower third of the snake is where you'll see a huge bulge. It's like an oval. It almost looks like they ate a very big rat and they're about to have a very big poop, which obviously at this point they probably won't even be eating, so that's not going to be the case. Sometimes the females will take one last meal before they ovulate, so sometimes that actually confuses people, and they're like, oh, she obviously can't be ovulating, she just had a meal last week. And that actually happened with me on 2 snakes. They ate, and then literally the week after that, they were ovulating. And I'm showing you examples. I'm going to be filming these examples for you all as well as I'm talking about it. But I just want you to know that there's going to be a lot more to it than just, oh, the female stopped eating. That's not going to be the only indication that she's about to ovulate. I have a female that stopped eating about 3 months ago, and she's just now shedding to have ovulation. So she just took a lot longer. She's still very plump. So it's not that she's not carrying eggs. It's just that she just didn't want to eat anymore. And that's just sometimes how it goes. Typically, there will be a pre-ovulation shed, which happens about 2 weeks before the actual ovulation takes place. And then 2 weeks after the ovulation takes place, they will have a pre-lay shed or a post-ovulation shed. The pre-ovulation shed doesn't happen every single time. Sometimes they just ovulate without shedding ever. The post-ovulation shed always happens. So once you see that ovulation, you'll wait about 2 to 3 weeks. You'll see a shed happen. After that shed, that means she's laying. There's no going back after the ovulation. That means she is laying. Once you see ovulation, that's it. You're getting eggs. You better start preparing yourself. You have about a month before you have eggs after the shedding takes place. So essentially, you see the ovulation, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, sometimes it's between there, you'll see a shed. 1 month after that, the eggs will be here. This is the time that you should start working on your incubation. If you do not have an incubator already, this is when you buy it. You want to buy it right now when they're ovulating. You should have bought it before. You should have been prepared before, but this is literally when you need to have it. People don't understand how much work it actually takes to set up an incubator and get it perfect for the eggs. You have to do a lot of troubleshooting. You have to make sure there's not any hot spots. It takes a lot more time than people actually think. It's not just set the temperature and walk away. You actually have to test every corner of that incubator to make sure there's no hot spots, and every single inch in that incubator is right on. So you have to do that way before you get eggs, which is why I'm saying this is the moment to do it, because you could get eggs as little as 3 weeks from now. You can get eggs as most as I've seen them go probably like 3 months after the post-ovulation shed where they didn't lay eggs. And sometimes it just takes them a little bit longer, but essentially it usually happens about a month to 45 days after the post-ovulation shed or pre-lay shed. So once you get your incubator set up to 89 degrees or 90 degrees, whatever you feel comfortable doing, you got to make sure you have vermiculite or perlite. I personally prefer vermiculite. Because once the eggs hatch, I usually take the egg tray out and I let them sit on the vermiculite. And if you use perlite, the perlite is kind of like rocks, and I don't think it's that comfortable in my opinion for the snake. Obviously they might not care, but I just don't want that on them. And the vermiculite's a lot softer, a lot smoother. So I prefer that for myself, I guess self-preference. But you can, either way, you will have something that will keep the moisture inside that container. So you have to have vermiculite or perlite. But what I've noticed is when eggs get really moist and they retain that water, if there's water surrounding it, let's say you put too much water in the vermiculite, or the vermiculite is not a different consistency than mine is, and it doesn't absorb as much because there's different grades, you'll have to obviously double check that for yourself, make sure that it's a clump. And when you clump it, it doesn't like pour water, it doesn't drench water. If your eggs get too moist, that's usually when the mold starts happening, and it's really hard to get the mold to stop. People have used foot powder and stuff like that. I've never technically had to use foot powder. The only eggs that ever molded on me were eggs that were going bad anyways, and I couldn't help it. So essentially, that was it. From the time the eggs get laid, you have 2 months of incubation. So for 2 months, you're not going to be checking on that clutch all the time. You can check it probably like once a month, maybe every 2 weeks, to make sure the temps stay good, make sure the eggs aren't having water sit on them and all that. So just dab them with the paper towel to make sure there's no water sitting on it, because again, you don't want it to mold. Then 2 months goes by, and if you choose to cut your eggs, that's fine. I cut my eggs, but I cut my eggs when I feel like they're ready. Usually you'll know when they're ready because you'll be able to feel the snake inside of the egg. And then if you don't choose to cut your eggs, then obviously you'll see them pipping, and then that's it. If for some reason you are letting them hatch on their own and you see all the eggs pipping, usually within 24 to 48 hours from the first egg hatching, the last egg will hatch as well. Unless you have an incubator where it stays cooler in the front and hotter in the back, then obviously it'll hatch from back to front, and that might take a different timeline there as far as hatching goes. So essentially now you have baby snakes, and after this point, it's all up to you to see what you got to do. Make sure they're eating, make sure you're taking care of them, and that's it. Now going back in time to the female laying eggs. Anytime a female lays eggs and you're not doing maternal incubation, I don't do maternal incubation, so I can't tell you how to do that. You have to make sure you get the egg scents off the female. So what I do is I use some Dawn dish soap and some water, and I just grab a paper towel, spray the snake off, like hold her by the head, spray the snake off, and just get the Dawn dish soap in there, go a couple wipes and stuff like that. Then I put them in some water and let them like get the Dawn dish soap off as well. And then while they're doing that, I will throw the bedding away, wipe down the tub with some Dawn dish soap and water as well. I use Dawn dish soap because it's obviously not as harmful as if you were using alcohol wipes or something. I've heard of people use baby wipes as well. That may work as well, so I'm not really sure. I've never used baby wipes. You got to put new bedding in there so there's no scent of the egg, and then you can get your female eating right away. The soonest I've had a female eat after laying eggs is the very next day. The latest I've had a female eat after laying eggs is usually about 2 weeks. So, and that's because I'm trying to make sure the scent is gone from the eggs. So she's not thinking that she has to incubate anything. So essentially, that's practically it. That's the whole video. From the time that you get your male and female locking, it could be anywhere from 6 to 8 months for you to get eggs. Right now, I have 3 females that started locking in September, and they're having their ovulation right now. So essentially, from September to right now, it took 4 months for the ovulation to happen. Then I have to wait another month and a half, 2 months for eggs to arrive. So essentially, that's 6 months. Sometimes it could go longer. Sometimes it could be quicker. It depends on where the female was in development whenever you paired her with the male. It just happens like that sometimes. And then 2 months from then, you have babies because the eggs are hatching. But if you made it this far into the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. As always,